this thing going. We are about, what? I can't do math. We are an hour 45 away from kickoff. Jacob Seuss, Jonathan Acosta. It feels a little bit more anticipated this week just because of the bye week. Arkansas returning to SEC play. They're going to take on Mississippi State. It's interesting because with how hard the SEC slate was to begin the year, obviously Texas A&M, Auburn, all of those guys, Georgia, you look at the last 3 games or 4 games and you're like, this is the easier part of the SEC slate, but Mississippi State by no means is an easy team, and neither is the remaining 4 games for Arkansas.
No, and we heard Miles Slusher touched on it this week that there's no gimme games in the SEC. You have to bring it every week because almost like in the NFL, how any given Sunday is a term, you can lose any given Sunday. And the SEC, you can really lose any given Saturday. We've seen it before, plenty of upsets already this season. So Arkansas has to bring it this week. We see how much Mississippi State is valued in the eyes of the people that matter, the committee, because... Shocking, yeah. They're not ranked in the AP poll. Tuesday, the first committee rankings come out, and they're ranked 17. They turn and look and say, okay, so what's Mississippi State's resume? They actually have the most top 25 wins out of any team in the country, which is kind of crazy to think about. But they've been a top 25 North Carolina State team, a top 25 Kentucky team, and they've been a Texas A&M team that's been really hot as of late. So this Mississippi State team is the real deal.
Yeah, and we were just talking about it. The big thing today, and it's been the big thing every week, is going to be the Arkansas defense. So the last time we saw them in real action was against Auburn, and they didn't play well. I don't count the UAPB game. That was a gimme for the Arkansas defense, and they didn't play well in that Auburn game. You didn't have Jalen Catalon. You're not going to have him today or any game for the rest of the season. And Mississippi State is a team that, can pick apart that Arkansas defense if they let them. So what do you expect to see out of that Arkansas defense after a bye week, hopefully a little more revved up?
To put it shortly, I don't really know what we're going to expect. Yeah. To kind of elaborate a little bit more, we can break down the X's and O's of this all we want. I think it really comes down to, is the Arkansas defense fresh? Sam Pittman said the team really needed the bye week, that they were really banged up. So as much as we want to focus on, can they pressure the quarterback? Are they going to bump and run with the receivers and stuff like that? It really just matters. If they have their legs under them, I think we can see a type of defense that flies to the ball the way they did against Texas A&M, against Texas. If they're not fully recovered, if they're still a little dinged up, we can probably see them fade down the stretch like they did against Ole Miss, like they did against Auburn, because this is a Mississippi State offense that can really wear teams down. I think that they have scored the majority of their points this year in the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. What does that translate to? That means that they're staying in the game, and then the fourth quarter, the defense starts to get tired, and then they put them away. How do they do it? With the air raid offense. They don't do it the way some of the academy schools do, running the ball, ground and pound. Their way of passing the ball almost is kind of ground and pound. They'll hit you with the short passes, death by 1,000 cuts, and that's how they wear down a team's pass rush and how they kind of get those chunk plays until they just turn into points throughout the course of a game.
Yeah, and you were telling me actually a little bit of a while ago, Arkansas hasn't had a sack since the Texas A&M game, which at this point in the year, that was many moons ago. So the defensive line really needs to get going against a quarterback in Will Rogers, who very quietly, sophomore from Mississippi State, he's one of the best quarterbacks in not only the SEC, but statistics-wise, couldn't say that word, in the country, one of the best.
Yeah, I mean, we know Dak Prescott is quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. He's already broken Dak Prescott's record at Mississippi State for completions in a season. There's still a quarter of the season left for Mississippi State, so it's incredible. He had 3 incompletions. I think it was 36 for 39 in that win against Kentucky, set an SEC record for completion percentage. So the system helps him, obviously. Short passes, screen passes, crossing routes, get the ball to receivers in space. Mississippi State does that fantastically. They lead the nation in yards after the catch. So they're asking Will Rogers to put the ball on target, and then they let their playmakers go and make plays in space. So for Arkansas, it's going to be really key 2 things. Tackle really well. We've seen them do that well. We've seen them struggle with that at times against Auburn, against Ole Miss, and then get off the field on third down. That's something that, despite recent struggles, the Arkansas defense has done really well. They're still in the top 10 nationally in third down defense. If they can get off the field on third down. It prevents Mississippi State from having these long drives that they're capable of putting together of 12, 13, 14 play drives.
Yeah, so if the defense does hold their own today and give the offense a chance to win the game, you look at the offense, and one of the big storylines this week is the Arkansas run game, which is obviously one of the best in the SEC, that kind of three-headed monster, against the Mississippi State rush defense, which is also one of the best of the SEC. So it's kind of like which one is going to break today. And interesting, coming into this one, Dominique Johnson is actually going to come in as the number one spot for Arkansas. And I don't think that has anything to do with Traylon Smith, because he's had a great season. It just goes to show how good Johnson's been. He's averaging nearly 9 yards a carry.
And if there's one player, apart from maybe Traylon Burks, that Coach Pittman's raved about all season, it's Dominique Johnson. It seems like almost every week he comes in and says, we need to find a way to give Dominique Johnson more carries. And I think one of the recent pressers that I listened to was, he was saying, they asked him, oh, well, how do you go about getting Dominique Johnson more carries? Right. Is it in the game, or do you have to make him the starter? And he's like, well, if making him the starter is the way we get him more carries, then we're going to make him the starter.
And here you go.
Here you go. He's the starter. So we'll see how he does. An underrated aspect of the Arkansas run game, or maybe not underrated for Hogs fans, but nationally, is KJ Jefferson.
Yes.
You know, he's one of only a few quarterbacks in the country with 1,600 yards passing and at least 400 rushing yards. Pittman said he was a little dinged up against Auburn. That maybe limited him a little bit. So as much as we talk about the defense kind of getting their legs under them, if KJ has some of his legs under him, he feels a little refreshed. Does that allow the Arkansas run game to continue putting up close to 250 rush yards per game the way they've been doing, and break down this Mississippi State run defense that is only giving up about 90 rush yards per game, but the two most recent offenses they've played is Vanderbilt and Kentucky, not necessarily the two most explosive offenses in the SEC.
Yeah, so that's going to be a big storyline to look out for today. Another, in my opinion, is the coaching. You look at the Ole Miss game, you look at Arkansas, you look at Mississippi State. Three teams all with second-year coaches. You've had success in Sam Pittman here at Arkansas, Lane Kiffin, of course, at Ole Miss. Then you have a Mississippi State team with Mike Leach coming into his second. Mike Leach, always one of the more interesting coaches in the country. You saw him in the Pac-12. Just what does Leach bring to the game coaching-wise, and who do you think has the advantage coaching-wise in this game?
The best way to describe Mike Leach is he's kind of a wild card, you know. So before here in Fayetteville, I used to work in Eugene, Oregon, covering the Ducks, covering the Oregon State Beavers. So we'd see plenty of Washington State. Mike Leach is a phenomenal offensive coach. Okay, so date back to his time at Texas Tech with Graham Harrell, Washington State. Anthony Gordon was a Heisman contender at quarterback for a while. Most people don't remember who Anthony Gordon is right now, but that's just how awesome his offenses were at Washington State. They can put up points. This Mississippi State offense feels maybe not as explosive as those Texas Tech and Washington State offenses, but in a way it feels a little more efficient. They can kind of grind the game out. They limited Kentucky and Vanderbilt these last 2 weeks to less than 50 offensive plays. Now, some of that is the defense getting off the field, but another part of that is the offense keeping the ball away from these two teams, and that's what this Mississippi State offense does so well.
That's interesting with a passing team, though, that they pass the ball, but also keep the ball away from you.
Right, and that goes back to what Mike Leach is as a coach, the air raid offense. He's not going to run the ball against you a whole ton. Mississippi State is one of the worst rushing attacks in the country, but they do it enough to keep you honest. What he wants to do is throw the ball at you, control the tempo of the game, stay ahead of schedule with the chains and everything, and then let his quarterback make the right decisions to get his team enough points throughout the course of the game that they're just going to outscore you and not let you have the ball enough to outscore them. Mike Leach keeps his team in games against tough teams. When I was in Oregon, they pushed a top-ranked Oregon team to the wire. They had a 37-35 win at Autzen Stadium. Their teams are always due for a couple of upsets in a season. They've already pulled off a few upsets this year. So coming into Razorback Stadium for them is going to be nothing that they haven't seen already.
So the air raid, the big passing, you know, we've talked about it a lot. So when you think Arkansas secondary and how you're going to defend that, you think Jalen Catalon, he needs to be the guy, and he's not there, obviously. Jalen Catalon out for the season. Miles Slusher, who's looked good at times, bad at times, replacing him so far. Do you think Will Rogers was going to attack Slusher? What do you think the Arkansas secondary needs to do? Because clearly, from what you're telling me, they're going to have their work cut out for them today.
The key for the Arkansas secondary is to keep things ahead of them. You know, make Mississippi State be on schedule, pick up the first downs and stuff like that. Just don't get beat by the big plays that we feel like the Arkansas secondary has given up against Ole Miss and against Auburn. That's really come back to hurt them. And I think this week they're going to need some help from the pass rush. I know it's hard when you have a quarterback that's getting the ball out in 3 seconds, 2.5 seconds. But if the defensive line can get their hands up, bat some balls down at the line of scrimmage. Or if they can, whenever Will Rogers does hold on to the ball a little bit longer, can they get some pass rush? Again, we go back to the fact that they haven't had a sack since that Texas A&M
That's
game.
crazy.
Since September, the Arkansas defense has not had a sack. And the other thing the Arkansas defense doesn't do a lot is force a lot of turnovers.
Yes.
I think they've only forced maybe 8 or 9 turnovers.
And a couple of them were Catalan.
Yeah, a couple of them.
Guy.
Catalan in that first week, he had 2 interceptions. Yes. So since then, only about 6 or 7 turnovers. So they need to force Will Rogers into fitting the ball into some tight windows, get some picks. If not, you have to find a way to get your defensive lineman to get to Rogers and bring that arm around, and then when they do get a hold of him, not just bringing them, but try to punch that ball out as well.
Yeah, 2 guys who I look for or hopefully expect to have big games today. Monteric Brown, who has stepped up really nicely in the secondary. He leads the team in picks. He's going to need to have a big game. We've talked about John Ridgway so much. He's a guy that was so good for the first couple games of the year, has kind of disappeared on that Arkansas defensive line. So they're going to need a big day all around on defense. But if Arkansas is going to walk away with this one 2-3, they're going to get that SEC win. In your mind, how do they do it? What's the key for Arkansas to get a win today?
They have to come out and punch Mississippi State in the mouth. Oftentimes when you have these kind of passing games where they don't really run the ball a lot, the teams can be a little bit more finesse, right? And I'm not saying Mississippi State is a finesse team, but on the flip side, they're also not a team like Georgia that's going to come out and just dominate you physically. So for Arkansas, the key is, do they have energy coming out of the bye week? Do they have their legs under them? And if so, can we see it right off the bat? Don't get behind right away to this team that can control the clock and kind of really force Arkansas to get away from what they want to do. Can Arkansas come out, kind of set the tone early, dictate the terms of how this game is going to be played? And if Arkansas is dictating the terms, that means on defense, they're flying to the ball, getting off the field on 3rd down. On offense, it means they're running the ball close to the 250 yards that we've seen per season. And it means KJ pulling the ball back. He has his legs under him, and he's running around making plays and then obviously finding bricks in the passing game. For Arkansas, I think if they can play the games on their terms, not fall into what Mississippi State wants to do, then I think they'll have a good chance today.
There you go. Well, 5 News at 6 tonight. Of course, Jonathan and I will break down the game. We'll hopefully have highlights. At some point tonight, you'll have reaction from Sam Pittman. But if you can't be at the game today, 5 News Facebook, where you're watching this right now, great place, pictures, score updates. We'll have all of that. So be sure to tune in tonight. And hopefully we're talking about Arkansas getting that second SEC win, because the month of November is going to be really important for this team.
Second SEC win, and if they do get it even bigger, it'll mean that they're bowl eligible, a huge 6th win on the season, and then people can start looking around maybe Nashville, Tampa, some early scouting for travel locations in late December, early January.
There you go. Well, enjoy the game, guys, whether you're here, whether you're at home, and we'll see you later tonight on 5 News at 6.